Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's C-O-M-B-E-S-T, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?
I'm Egbert, the owner of this station. Check out my website at egbert.com. That's E-G-G-B-U-R-T, egbert.com. Now it's back to Brad and John. Check out their website at bjshow.co. The BJ Show? Come on, guys. Anyway, here's B and J.
Once upon a time, John, someone said to me that I was a lawbreaker. And they say...
Oh, yeah, maybe a scofflaw. Maybe you need somebody to pay your temporary tag fees, Brad, in St. Louis City. But you are a scofflaw.
Matter of fact, I was having lunch with this person. And at the time, she was not working for me. She was working for another advertising entity. I won't say what kind of company it is. And she talked about how she was a devout religious person, and she did not violate any laws of God, nor did she violate any laws of man. And she professed to me that in her daily life, she led this pure life, that she didn't violate any single law. Okay, now...
Oh, I know where this is going.
So the interesting part of this is that we're having lunch, and we're going to meet with a client afterwards, and we're trying to team sell them, because she was selling, and I won't sell exactly what kind, because somebody might be able to figure out who this is, and I'm not trying to embarrass this person, but she was selling one form of advertising, and obviously I was selling radio. So we leave the restaurant. We're in St. Peter's, or actually in St. Charles. I think we're eating at O'Charlie's right there and off of Cave Springs and 70. And she pulls out of the parking lot, and I know what kind of car she had. She was right in front of me. She goes up to the traffic light there, and she runs a red light. The light's yellow.
That's a law of man.
Right. By the time she gets to the intersection, the light is not only yellow, but it is red, and she just goes right through. Okay, but she gets hung up on the other side of the overpass, and we're driving down West Clay, where they're going from one side of 70, the south side of 70 to the other. So light turns green for me ultimately. I catch up with her, and she's driving along West Clay, where I believe the speed limit is 40 miles an hour, and I'm doing 60, and I can't catch up with her. So she's doing at least 20 miles an hour over the speed limit. The place we're going to was almost down to Zumble, and the parking lot, there was an entrance to the parking lot, and the particular entrance she took said, no left turn, and she made a left turn into the parking lot.
Oh, no way.
So I get out of the car, and I say to her, hey, remember that conversation we had at lunch? And she says, yeah. I said, you told me you don't violate any laws, that you are this super obedient person, and you don't violate any God's laws or any man's laws, anything like that. And she goes, yeah. I go, okay. Number one, you ran the red light there at Cave Springs and 70. Then down West Clay, you were doing at least 20 miles an hour over the speed limit. And the entrance you came in, I pointed right over there. See that sign? It says no left turn. Oh, I didn't see that. And I said, okay. So the point being, I'm not a perfect person by any stretch of the imagination, but I've always found it problematic when people tell me that I'm a bad person because of X, Y, and Z. Now, what's interesting is, typically, the people that tell me that tend to be more on the religious side. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
And the idea being is that they essentially look at themselves as perfect and everyone else as imperfect. Does that make any sense to you?
Yeah, that's very, you would call them kinos this week, Brad.
Right. Christians in name only. Okay. John sends me the reason, this is a lead up to this story. And what's interesting was, let me just say this. I read this article, I think it was some general or something like that. And he essentially said, there are so many laws on the books in our country nowadays, state, federal, county, municipal, whatever the heck they are. There's so many laws that no one can get through a day without breaking at least one law. So John sends me this the other day, which I thought was interesting. Out of the Kansas City Star, here's the headline. It's illegal to let these 19 noxious weeds grow in your yard in Kansas and Missouri. And here we go again. There are 19 noxious weeds, and that's in quote marks, that could very well be in your lawn, and it's illegal. Now, is this bizarre or what?
Yeah, it's a lot of it falls in the category of IRM. And you have insect resistance management, which is the idea that certain plants can attract certain insects that the county is not equipped to battle, Brad. It's IRM.
And according to this article John sent me, Missouri and Kansas list a total of 19 plants that residents are advised to uproot. Here's how to spot them and what the state law says about preventing their spread. It also says and once again, apparently the laws are almost identical between Kansas and Missouri. How does that happen? I mean, are there?
Yeah, I think that's a matter of best practices. And if you look at weed science organizations are across different states. So for example, and this is now, Brad, you'll love this because it's super nerdy and it involves public money. The land grant universities. So most states that have agriculture have a land grant university that's focused exclusively on agriculture research. So they employed weed scientists to look at how can farmers and folks who say run cattle manage different weeds, noxious weeds, good weeds, bad weeds, whatever, on their farm. And so they share a lot of research amongst each other, which is why you end up, long story short, it's why you end up having a lot of IRM in Kansas is the same as IRM in Missouri.
According to this, and I'm quoting, noxious weeds are one of the greatest threats to the Kansas environment, writes the Kansas Department of Agriculture. They displace native plant species, interfere with the production of agricultural crops, increase erosion, destroy wildlife habitat, and decrease property values. So there are people right now listening that if they were to go out with pictures of these weeds, they're probably in their lawn someplace, wouldn't you? Unless they have like an immaculate lawn, right?
If you used an app like Picture, there's an app called either Picture This or Picture That, and you took a picture of the weeds, it would tell you, and then you could look it up, and you'd be like, oh wow, I am illegally harboring a musk thistle in my yard.
Well, what's interesting was you say that, and it almost sounds like you're making up a weed, but that is a real weed, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And I got to work with a lot of these. One of the main topics that I worked on in the old Monsanto days was weed management. I worked with a lot of weed scientists, and I spent a lot of time with fireweed and Palmer pigweed and horseweed, and I got to in kochia. Kochia was a particular favorite. I got to work with a lot of these, Brad. And the definition of a weed. You know what the definition of a weed is? This is not a punchline. This is true.
Go ahead.
Any plant out of place.
Really?
Yeah. So if you were driving down, you'll see this a lot of times once crops start to emerge and farmers are going through planting season now. You see a lot of planters rolling. If you're, early summer, you're driving wherever you are in St. Charles County, Franklin County, wherever, and you see, say, a cornfield, or you'll see a soybean field and some really short soybean plants, and then you'll see a corn plant popping up. That plant is called a volunteer because in that field the previous year a farmer had probably planted corn, and that corn plant, during harvest, one little seed, one little kernel, I should say, got buried underneath the soil and is emerging amongst the soybean plants. Now you say, oh, that looks cool. If you're a farmer, you hate it because what you want as a farmer is you want a uniform field. You want the plants to emerge at the exact same time. So that corn plant is not a corn plant. That corn plant is a weed. A weed is any plant out of place.
Now, what John is not telling you, and I'm going to take what he said one step further, because of the fact that Monsanto has actually, back in the day, they're no longer Monsanto, it's now Bayer, has actually sued farmers over this. And tell me if I'm correct. I'm correct on this, aren't I?
Absolutely not. No, we've never sued farmers for volunteer crops at all.
That's not what I've heard. I've heard that.
I know. And you know what, Brad? This is a Mary Elizabeth Coleman moment for you. And one of my primary responsibilities from 2008 to 2010 was to battle the misinformation of people who say Monsanto sues farmers for having volunteer crops in their field. That's literally never happened. Monsanto has literally never sued a farmer for having It's called adventitious presence is one thing, and then it's also called volunteer crops. There's a whole lot of things where genetic material may show up where you don't expect it, Brad. You've been subjected to a lot of stories. There was a movie called Food Inc. that came out. There's been a lot of misinformation, and they're great stories. Can you believe Monsanto sues farmers? Birds just fly around and drop seed in their droppings, and Monsanto will sue you. Literally never happened, Brad. And I would suggest people who've heard those type of stories invest, 60 or 90 seconds in finding out the truth.
I don't even know where to start from all of the things that have been said that are just wrong.
It's appropriate right there, Brad. Yeah, Monsanto never sued farmers for accidental presence of GMOs in their field. I worked on Save Seed suits, Brad, from Pilot Grove to Iowa to Indiana, all across the country, and it literally never happened.
Well,
Monsanto went after farmers who chose to harvest seed, brown bag it, and sell it illegally. Monsanto never once sued a farmer who just accidentally had some genetic material that belonged to Monsanto in their field. You bought into a really misleading and incorrect suggestion, Brad.
Boy, if Mary Elizabeth Coleman was on the phone, she'd school me just like you just did, right?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. I mean, if it were a legal issue, she sure would. So many falsehoods about, but it makes a great story, doesn't it, Brad? Can you believe that corporation is just suing a poor farmer?
Okay, for those of you who want to know this is actually sort of funny. I'm going to read these because some of these are really funny. Field bindweed, Johnson grass, musk thistle, Sarica lespedeza, let me keep going here, common teasel, Scotch thistle, cutleaf teasel, spotted knapweed, multiflora rose, purple loosestrife, marijuana.
How does that just accidentally end up in somebody's yard?
I have no idea. Burr ragweed, hoary cress. Wasn't she in court the other day? Anyway.
Yeah, she's definitely hoary.
Leafy spurge, pignut, quack grass, Russian knapweed. Those are the 19.
Yeah.
Now, what's interesting is, of those 19, there's about 15 of them which would make great names for rock bands, don't you think?
Yeah, hey, or maybe just a garage band. Hey. I don't know. Now, it's also, and I had this conversation with a listener recently. Do you know that there's certain crops that are just considered popular crops that are illegal to grow? So, for example, Brad, if you were in St. Charles County and you were a hobbyist maybe, and you came across some cottonseed, or maybe you went down to Georgia. The devil went down to Georgia and got a little cotton last fall and brought it up here. It would be illegal to grow a cotton plant in St. Charles County.
It's interesting because I just got a text from someone who said that as well too. So in St. Charles County,
really?
Yes, in St. Charles County, it's illegal to grow cotton.
Yeah. So every state has different, and again, this goes back to insect resistance management. So every state sets guidelines, county by county, for what crops can be grown in that state. So the idea is, Brad, if you were in Minnesota and you decided, hey, I want to grow a whole bunch of cotton in those 60 days that we have warm weather. I'm going to get a really fast growing cotton plant. And you put in 10 acres of cotton in your Minnesota field, then you would attract, the theory is you would attract certain insects that aren't native to Minnesota. Over a period of time, if everybody did that, you would start to have insect migrations, you would have effects on other plants, you would have effects on the soil and the entire ecosystem. So the state and the state departments of agriculture say, okay, we don't have the infrastructure in this particular county to fight this sort of insect. So for now, and in Missouri, for example, I think I'm guessing it's around Sikeston, maybe Perry County, is the northern limit by which you could grow cotton. Great folks down there like a Barry Bean would know the answer to that. But only in certain counties are you allowed to grow certain crops.
Because I was going to say, when you drive down 55 to, if you go all the way down to like Memphis, and you see cotton in the fields down there in southern Missouri.
Yeah, so there's a ton of Missouri counties in which you're allowed to grow cotton. For sure. Missouri has a proud cotton history.
Interesting. Now, here's the interesting part of this. I read this list off, and you and I laughed about it, but marijuana is illegal to grow in the state of Missouri. So how did they change that law since now it's legal to grow marijuana?
Well, I'm sure that you have to purchase the appropriate permit, Brad. Do you think the government is going to miss out on an opportunity to charge you a permitting fee to grow something?
I guess not. But
I mean, come on, Brad.
Would you also need a permit to grow cut leaf teasel or Scotch thistle?
Yeah. I hope not, because I've been growing that like a mug out in the backyard. Now, you know what the problem is, though? I went to my friend Brad Hildebrand, and I asked him if I could borrow some of his Spectricide.
Yeah.
And it turns out it didn't work.
You know, it's funny you should mention that because I finally broke down. I was using the Spectricide stuff, and it did not work. And I finally went back to my local store and bought some good old, Monsanto or Bayer, whatever you call it now, Bayer Roundup, and it worked like really fast.
Gangbusters, Brad. Now, I'll tell you one more herbicide fact that you don't know. When you first started telling me that story about the Spectrum Brands product, I thought you were going this direction, but you weren't. Sometimes when you purchase a weed killer like a Roundup for tough weeds or something, you know how you spray it on and you have a little bit of bubbling action?
Uh-huh.
So this is a little known fact that I really couldn't talk about when I worked for the company. The surfactants so surfactants are like things in soap that help soap work. Those work and those are effective. But the bubbling action that some manufacturers put in, Brad, you know what the benefit of that is?
It stays on the leaf?
No, the benefit is nothing. And it's designed because men like to go outside and they like to spray weeds and they like to see a little bubble action because they feel that if you put it side by side with a herbicide that doesn't do that, and you ask consumers, they'll say, well, this one's working because you can see it kind of bubbling a little bit. So the bubbling action in many over-the-counter stuff you can buy at your local garden store, that bubbling action doesn't do anything. It's only there to make you feel good about the weed performance, about the performance of the product.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you were to spray, Brad, I do what you do, which is I mix Roundup with water when I'm spraying it. So I just use good old generic Roundup and water. And it has no bubbling action. It has no pops and fizzles and sparks and crunches. And it works the exact same as if you were to buy a whiz-bang weed killer that has bubbly, sparkly, shiny bubbles. But the latter just makes you feel good. And I remember the same week, Brad, that a unnamed scientist was explaining this to me. I had a conversation with a man who told me that he loved spraying Roundup, and he didn't know that I knew the story. And he's like, oh, I love it. You just spray it on there, and you could see it like fizz, and you could see it kill the weeds right away. And I was like, that's right, buddy. You keep buying those Monsanto products. Now, I wouldn't buy Monsanto products because, Brad, there was a Canadian farmer named Percy Schmeiser. I saw it in a documentary, and Monsanto sued him. He was just growing crops, and Monsanto sued him, Brad.
What's the true story?
Pansy. What a liar, too. And we got him. We won in court over and over again. Shout out to Trish Jordan, who won a number of those cases, who went through a ton of hell for standing up for a company that was the target of lies and misinformation.
What was he doing? What was he doing that you went after him?
He was stealing the seed, Brad. He was stealing the seed. And then when he gets caught, he says, I don't know. A bird just put droppings in an exact same line for acres. That's how the seed got here.
How is he stealing?
Are you going to sue me for bird droppings? I'm just a poor farmer.
How is he stealing the seed? Who is he stealing it from?
From other people. So the seed had been harvested by other farmers who actually paid the Monsanto tech fee for the seed. And then in harvest, some farmers who choose to break the law will take some of their seed that has genetic material in it, brown bag it, and then sell it illegally to other farmers. Brad.
I get you. Okay. So in other words, he's buying it essentially illegally
on a black market. And then
the secondary
claiming to
market.
be the victim, Brad. Anybody who needs to know about this should look up Percy Schmeiser and maybe not go to NPR, maybe go to a news organization and look up how his own province's legal system ruled in that case, Brad.
Well, you know what?
And look, I'm not paid to say this anymore, Brad. It's just so silly that people will hear something and say, Monsanto sues farmers, John. I heard that in a documentary.
Well, You know, the interesting thing about that is, you know what happened to Percy after, was it Percy Schmeiser, was that his name?
Schmeiser, yeah.
Schmeiser. You know what happened after he got caught? He did a different
I don't know.
career.
I bet you got a drop, though.
No, he became a recording artist, and he recorded a song called When a Man Loves a Woman. When a man loves a woman. You know that song?
I do know that song.
That's that's Percy Sledge. Okay, never mind.
Oh, it's a different one.
Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's Combest, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?